WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Kudos and thanks to all the sponsorship from our friends at Coppin State University, where they beat Morgan on the boys and girls side this week, or the men's and the women's, as we'd like to say, as well as UMBC. And I'm wearing the UMBC hat here because UMBC's giving them a little stir again, and they'll play Vermont this weekend. Marty Conway is here to talk about the business of sports with me, and not a moment too soon. Dude, I almost had you on before free agency ended. I think the last time I had you on, maybe Joe Flacco was still dangling. It's been about a month or so, maybe Super Bowl time. And wow, has everything changed. You know, we can bitch about the Orioles all we want, but now I'm holding the Ravens PSL. I don't have an Orioles invoice, Marty, so I don't have that to hold up. But I have my Ravens PSL invoice that I've been holding up here. My detachment is happening as well. Wow, the Ravens have really taken a purple bloody nose this week, and the Orioles aren't much. This is a tough time to be a Baltimore sports fan, I think, right now.
Well, if we're referring to the dual rebuilding strategies, which I don't think we've ever seen before in Baltimore, right? I mean, at one time, one team would be doing really well, and the other team might be rebuilding, and then vice versa. But at this point, all the signals are, and look, I think if you trace it back, like you said, there was the move of Flacco, and then ultimately, signing Harbaugh to a long-term contract, bringing out players who maybe not necessarily deserved a press conference, but they were having a press conference for that. I think that now, as you look back, you can connect the dots and say that they were sort of telegraphing, let's have news while we have news, because there may be a time here where we're not going to have news because we are transforming the organization based on the quarterback that we have, the new offensive coordinator, et cetera. And all indications point towards, hey, everybody, look to the draft because we have a lot of picks and we're going to draft a lot of young players, and we're going to go in a new direction and stick with us. I think that will be the implied message, even though that's not necessarily what they will come out and say.
And boy, the Ravens have never said that, right? The words that Luke used, and I'm going to keep going back to him, was transitional, and he called it a test tube offense, which means it's an experiment, which is what it was called to me by organization insiders the night that they drafted Lamar Jackson. But fascinating to me that I couldn't give my tickets away last year, Marty, right? And I had a really interesting experiment here last week, and I want to tell you about it because you're probably going to hear it on the radio during the owners' meetings right before opening day. I sat with Kevin Richardson from the Baltimore Sun. He came in, he's doing a movie on the Colts and Colt memories and Memorial Stadium and all that stuff. And I sat here on a Friday night and I had a beer, and it was 3 days after my father's 100th birthday. And I got very emotional. I had just gone through all the ticket stubs and stuff like that. And I found Nestor Shylock's autograph on the back of a 1978 Colts picture that I got at Sportsnet at Our Lady of Fatima, Marty. And, I went through all these memories of the Colts and what happened and how it all fell apart, and Burt Jones and Bubba Baker. And I even talked to Dennis about that a little bit. You can go find that up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. I would just say this. These cyclical things that happen, the tectonic plate shift, and Marty, as we've gone through, the baseball team has a lease up in 3 years. Camden Yards ain't new anymore. It ain't a honeymoon anymore. It isn't even a good marriage anymore. We're 30 years into this, and someone's going to be negotiating something with somebody named Angelos, it appears. There's going to be a governor that appears to be Larry Hogan, unless he's president by then. There's going to be a mayor who might be me by then. Who knows? I would just say that's going to happen on the baseball side. And then there's the football side where, nobody's come to the games the last 2 years, man. I can't give my tickets away. And I could hear Steve and those guys saying, well, nobody came to see Suggs and Weddle and Flacco play anyway when we're winning 9 and 10 games. We played a playoff game 8 weeks ago. That's not even good enough for these people. Let's just rebuild and try to go find Tom Brady, because this isn't going to be good enough, and we're seeing what the Redskins do. And then, Cleveland and Oakland and the Jets win trades, and win free agency in March, and they're loser franchises. I don't know what the fan base here wanted, but most teams have to do this just because New England and Pittsburgh and maybe the Ravens have made it look like it doesn't happen. But to your point, I don't know what to do with the PSLs when they don't know what to do with it. I mean, there's a real issue going on with sports and money and business in this town. And Baltimore Positive is part of my outreach on this. But you've seen this where you've seen a franchise leave, and you were in the absolute crosshairs of trying to keep the Orioles in Baltimore in the 80s, which wasn't easily done, by the way, right?
Oh, my gosh, no. I mean, looking back, it was so difficult. There were so many reasons to not be in Baltimore, frankly, to be in Washington, opportunities, the owner having, a well-established Washington relationship. No, it was sort of blood sport in that regard, and I think people look back sort of whimsically now and say, oh, this, was an interesting, wonderful time, et cetera. No, it was a really difficult time for people involved in it, for fans, for politicians, and for other folks like that. And I think this is an interesting experiment, if that's what it is, because for the most part, people have begun, and you just listen to the media narratives in cities, people understand, or at least media and then fans understand, a rebuilding process in baseball has been done before. They understand how you lose 100 games, how you're supposed to come back. In football, there hasn't been this kind of concept of any sort of rebuild, which again is why I'm not sure that's maybe what we're calling it now, but in 45 or 50 days when the draft happens and they draft, 8 to 10 players, and some of them will be recognizable, and they sort of now have to come forward with what their theory of how they're going to, play the games actually appears. But underlying all that is the negative narrative of being downtown and inside of Baltimore City. I know that other people saw the huge spread in the New York Times Magazine this past weekend about, the sort of crime and leadership issues in Baltimore. All of that underlies going downtown. And what I've said for a long time now is, in the sports environment, in the live sports environment, you have to really be at your peak. You have to be the Washington Capitals to be constantly doing that, because then it takes away all the reasons why people either wouldn't go to the arena, wouldn't buy a ticket, wouldn't spend for a PSL, et cetera, et cetera. The live experience now for many fans requires an all-out optimal performance, right? Good on the field, good off the field, positive ticket prices, low concession prices, what the Falcons started a few years ago. All of that has flipped and changed, and that's sort of what people expect now. $10 or $11 for a beer is not what they expect. They expect it to be $6 or $7 because that's what they're finding in other stadiums. And so,
and that's what it is at the bar, right? When they go to the Anthem or they go to the 930 Club, wherever they're going, there's a price point and what I'm willing to pay down the street for having a beverage. I mean, I think you see that with tailgating in the lot where people are getting drunk in the parking lots before the games. I've seen that with concerts where there's a whole lot more going on outside than there is. I can't wait to get in there and spend $11 on a beer at a Poison concert, right?
Yeah, and so that along with all the other options that you can have streaming locally, what you want to see, the impact of Netflix, all these other things, as I've said many times, we teach this throughout our program at Georgetown, which is you need to pay attention to the trends that are around your sport, because those are consumers. They're the same consumers that buy and watch Netflix that come to Ravens and Oriole games, and you have to understand the experience that they're going through, whether it's a digital ticket, whether it's easily transferable, whether you can get your money back, all those different things, because that's the world that they live in on their regular life. You can't expect them to just put that on hold and live in your world for 1 week, one game, one homestand, whatever it is. And so I suspect what you'll see with regard to the Orioles this year is a return to an incredible amount of crowds for Yankee, Red Sox, Phillies, Dodgers, whoever else that is. And
Padres.
Padres, exactly. And you'll see a lot of nights where they'll announce 8,000 to 10,000, and there'll be 4,000 to 5,000 perhaps in the ballpark. And I think that's where we're headed back to until such time. And maybe even, some of the players that are on the opening day roster will be gone by July because they'll have become tradable commodities along the way. So it's going to be an incredible transition, if that's the word that Luke used, I think in both organizations, perhaps, because of where they're trying to get to. And look, the last thing I'll say on this is the underlying to all of this is are these the two ownership groups that will own the teams in 3 to 5 years? I think you can put money on it now where you could get decent odds that in both cases that may not be the case. And it would not surprise me for a lot of reasons in the next 3 to 5 years if those two families that own those teams don't own those teams at that point. And I think that's a realistic. At some point, you have to cash your profits because you're entitled to do that. If you're only going to win something once every 8, 10, 12 years, then maybe the next cycle is you're not interested in waiting around for it. You have other things you'd like to do.
Well, it certainly feels like Bisciotti hibernating is him being afraid of me asking him the question, are you selling the team? Because I'll tell you what, and I'll be writing a Dear Steve letter. I am waiting for the owners' meetings next week to see what happens because this is an incredible transition, right? I mean, I own a sports company, Marty. If sports isn't going to be important here, maybe I should be taking on bigger issues like Baltimore Positive, which is, to your point, the first thing you say as a sports executive, who, by the way, doesn't live downtown, but doesn't appear to be afraid to come down here and go to Amici's with me and have a bowl of pasta every now and again, or to have a drink in Federal Hill as we've done, or maybe to come to my home, as I hope you're going to be doing here in the spring. But I would say the first thing, 10 minutes ago in our conversation, the first thing you say is people don't want to come downtown. And wow, that better change, right? I mean, you talk about Lamar Jackson, or you can talk about Trey Mancini, or the genius of Mike Elias, or whatever it is, but over the next 36, 48 months, whatever it's going to be before either one of these teams is I don't want to say relevant. Baseball, they're a long way from being relevant. I'm not convinced the football team can't draft 2 Hall of Famers 6 weeks from now, sign 2 washed-up guys, one at the deadline, and Lamar Jackson runs the ball, and they start the season 10-2 because nobody can figure it out, right? Like, I don't think that can't happen. The baseball team's a whole other thing, but I'm just going to assume for now the football team's not going to win the next year or two-ish, that the city better be getting better, not worse during that time. And to your point, it's not going to be getting better because the Orioles are going to be packing them in, or John and Lou are going to roll their sleeves up. They're too busy on a golf course with not having sleeves, or at the track, whatever it is. But I don't. Where's the leadership here, Marty? Well, why is Bisciotti hibernating? Like seriously, dude. Like, if the problem is a guy like me has a $1,500 that I can or cannot afford on my desk, that I don't want to spend for tickets that I have to fight to give away every week for a team that might win 6 or 7 games, which is fine with me. That's not the reason I'm not doing this. I just think that this is a time for people to come together, not apart. I mean, and that's going to be my Baltimore Positive message, that somebody better be stepping up into a leadership role, and I'm guessing it's not going to be anybody named Angelos, and right now it doesn't feel like it's going to be anybody named Bisciotti, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, on that front, they set the expectation over years of having that State of the Ravens, and you saw what it became because you went to them. I watched them on the stream, and you went to them personally. So there were 4 or 5 people up on the stage, but it became a question of Steve one-on-one, and then I think he actually did some one-on-ones on that. And you can see the change this year where they gave Eric DeCosta his day, they gave John Harbaugh his day, and like I said, they gave a couple players their day. And I think that was a pretty clear indication of, that there wasn't going to be this process this year. Now, whether that forebodes, what happens in the future, who knows, but they did set the expectation for so many consecutive years of having that with the media, and then to not have it, clearly people are going to draw some of their own conclusions on that. On the Orioles side, I think the interesting thing about this is, look, as you mentioned at the outset of the show, the lease goes in 2022, it will be 30 years. You have to pull way, way back because those negotiations, we don't get to the last year. It's not like your mortgage where you get to the last year. You don't do that. There's a whole process that has to happen. So I suspect that after this legislative session is over, things will begin to develop between the state and the Orioles in terms of what are they going to do. And what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to exchange lease. First of all, they're going to have to agree on the process. And then second, they're going to have to exchange ideas on what they're going to do, because clearly I think there are 2 things that are likely to happen. Number one is there's going to be some more innovation, renovation, whatever you want to call it, within the seating bowl, within the ballpark itself. I think you're going to look for things like Utah Street. That has to be ripped up, torn apart, because underneath is all the infrastructure for Wi-Fi and all those things, which are far, far too old and unreliable. Then I think they'll do some things in the seating bowl for the experience of the fans. And then they'll find some other things where they can make some money on. The second big thing will be
and you just say that. There's find some things they can make some money on. Like the money's just going to appear, right? Like literally, like all of a sudden, some wireless provider is just going to come in and gift them a $2 million a year sponsorship. Like that's what they need. They need people with money to care, right? I mean, at the heart of it, they can build anything they want. They need people to care, and they need businesses that, quite frankly, don't exist here anymore. Black & Decker, Crown Central Petroleum, that loved baseball, that lived baseball, and don't anymore, right? They need to make friends.
The infrastructure thing is something that they have to do in order to make the experience better. And then what I think happens is, there'll be some more commercial opportunities, areas where you can not have to sit and watch a game, but maybe congregate, things like that, where they will change the nature of how you watch the game. But the bigger money, the bigger opportunity is adjacent to the ballpark. And I give you an example because I think you can visualize it. Lot A, right? Lot A is a nice piece of land that is used for a combination of parking and TV trucks and different things like that. That's a commercial gold mine. The fact that you drive by that for 300 and some days a year and you can't stop and do anything there.
Well, everyone is familiar with Philadelphia and the Xfinity thing that they've built in the middle of the parking lot, right? Everyone here is either familiar with Gillette Stadium being next to what is really the Avenue at White Marsh, right? Or any of, if you've been to St. Louis, they've literally turned what the Sports Legends Museum is into a bar, right? That is their bar. On game nights, every day they have kids playing wiffle ball out there, Marty. I mean, the Bush people have made a downtown experience in a way, and the Cubs people, they've bought up 8 blocks around the place and have turned it into Disney World with a Cubs logo, literally.
Yeah. So I think that space between the two stadiums, if you will, A and B, I think is prime for them to discuss what to do. I think the Orioles will probably lean more towards the Lot A kind of part of B, but I think that will change the whole experience. I would not be surprised to see some of that walkway between their chains. That becomes more permanent, commercial, different things. That's where the opportunity is. If that goes well, then I think the ownership situation may remain as it is. If it doesn't go well, then I think you can start potentially maybe see that this is how it could potentially change, because ultimately it's about getting more dollars from your footprint like that, and so that's going to start to change over the next 12 to 18 months, because then it's going to take another 12 to 18 months after that for them to get these bonds on the market that they would have to sell in order to pay for that. The state's going to have to float some bonds that they can generate the money from, because ultimately the state's going to pay for most of that, likely most of that change. The Orioles will have to put in some of their own money. So that's why I say I think after this legislative session there'll be a down period a little bit, but then it will start to kick up, and I think you'll start to see some real activity after that. And then who knows what that means in terms of both current ownership situations remaining as they are. Because from the Orioles standpoint, they control more of that lease, so there's more incentive for them to do it. From the Ravens standpoint, from the ownership of the Ravens standpoint, they basically play there for 8 or 10 games, and then they spend the rest of their time out at the castle, and that's where the opportunity is. If it's not going to be something new and different, then perhaps it's time for a change. But I could clearly see the next 3 to 5 years there being a change in either one or both of the ownership situations with these teams.
Why wouldn't the boys go down to Nashville and just say, build us a stadium on the riverside here? I thought a lot about this for these kids, right? Like, and they've loved baseball, right? Like, they love the cachet. They love sitting on the orange couch. They love putting the suit on. I mean, God, John channels his old man. Like, it's amazing sitting there and watching him interact for an hour, how much he walks and talks and looks like his father, right? And it feels to me like they're never going to be heroes here, right? Like, no matter what they do, they don't get to walk the streets here and be heroes. If they've got the hero complex, if they do, this team will wind up somewhere else. It won't. They won't sell it. They'll go to Nashville, become heroes, and take their lifestyle and their money and their baseball team and, be the Nashville, Bluebirds or whatever. I don't know what the hell. But, I mean, I don't think that's above where they are at this point, and I think it's very, very easy for anyone to look back 5 years from now and see Baltimore as a Newark, New Jersey graveyard, and them saying, look, we built a better team. Nobody came out. There's no business there. There's no money. White people don't want to come downtown, which is the truth. Everybody's afraid of downtown. We can't move the ballpark. We tried to negotiate with them. They just didn't want the team anymore. They got the Nationals now. We'll just, they didn't respect my father. They didn't respect all that we did, all the Angelo. I can hear this when it doesn't go well, Marty, because I don't know that it's going to go well. I don't know that it's going to go well if Larry Hogan's in charge. I don't know that it's going to go well if it's Sheila Dixon or Kathy Pugh or name anyone. I don't know that there's any hunger that we have to save the Orioles around here and give them the sun, the moon, the stars, the parking lot, and $1 a year lease anymore. I don't know. I don't. That's an interesting conversation because your era, as you pointed out, was hard enough to get one stadium built after the Mayflowers left, when the NFL didn't want us. Then we look back on a generation later. It's miraculous here, Marty. I built my whole life for 30 years around Baltimore sports. We've had champions and bronze bust and superstars. And I'm doing an event with Cal Ripken with LifeBridge this week. And Brad Jackson's going to have his Super Bowl ring on. How close it all came to all going away, right? Like the Orioles, if EBW would have been a prick, that team would have wound up somewhere in Manassas or Northern, somewhere, right? Columbia, anywhere, where the best steal would have been in 1988. Well, D.C. was kind of broke, and Marion Barry was involved, I'm sure, at that point. But I would say that the way this all turned out was very fortuitous, and it took a lot of people with a lot of fire in the belly, a lot of want, including Peter himself, to get the team, as I've written a book about. There's a lot of fire and a lot of want for sports, for baseball, for being a big league team. And, as Angelos would say, we're not a chain town. We're not a branch community. We're locally owned. And all. I don't know where all that pride is, dude. And certainly on the Orioles side, you were part of building all of that. And you're one of the guys that's standing on the outside saying, I don't really recognize this, as my Orioles or my team or my franchise, or I identify with Baltimore. And as you know, kids don't identify at all with local pride. They identify with their fantasy team or what team they bet on last night, which is the whole next wave of this. So I really do sit here as the old guy at 50, having watched it all, and I worry about what this slump is going to look like, because there's this promise that Mike Elias is just going to deliver a World Series here in 2024, and there's this thing that DaCosta and Harbaugh think we're going to draft him up and we're going to win 3 Super Bowls in the next 8 years. From where we are right now, it's flat ground. I mean, it could be anything, but that's very, very difficult to do for either one of these franchises. And to your point, once they both start losing or the fans stop caring, it's hard to get that money back. It's hard to come back and get me back as a PSL owner at $1,500 a year once I stop paying the bill, Yeah,
and in particular football, because of their limited number of regular season games, 8 home games and 2 preseason games, the model for them is built on max attendance. It's not that way in baseball, where over 80 games, you're going to have highs, you're going to have lows, and you hope to have, a few million tickets sold. In football, the emphasis on what's going on today. And when you see blocks of stadium, you see blocks throughout the stadium where people are missing, that's really predicated on that, right? So, look, Jerry Jones and some other NFL owners have adopted the philosophy where they can make money outside of game day and on game day. It's very clear here in Baltimore, all of the money is generated for game day, right? And so that puts a lot of pressure and a lot of interest for people like yourselves and others to say, there's 10,000 seats available. There's 15,000 seats missing. There are people not coming in December. And so that's why I say the rebuilding process in football, and in particular in this town, appears to be even more difficult to pull off, because you just have a limited number of times to turn the fan base out. And when you don't, or for whatever reason, the other underlying thing is, look, everything's great now. We're in a 10-year record bull market, right? And so the economy's good, unemployment's low, all these different things. Take those two scenarios and put them into an economy that has some sort of recession or job loss or some sort of issue in Baltimore, and you suddenly exasperate potentially any weakness that occurs throughout. So for a lot of reasons, people have to cross their fingers and hope that the macro circumstances remain the same, because if those change, it's going to have like you said, an outside effect, because people will change their habits pretty quickly, and the entertainment and amusement dollar will go further down the list in terms of what people want to do. They will always turn out if you're, having a good season at the beginning, middle, and end. But if you're not, they're going to find reasons to either consume your product on a non-game day and watch you on TV or streaming, or just not show up at all. So I think those are the challenges that both franchises have, and realistically, it's going to be an interesting year or two here. I think on the Orioles side, they're primed to lose at least 100 games, and I think you could see that perhaps for at least 2 years. And what are they going to do otherwise? And at the same time, some of that money's going down the road. The Caps are headed for another postseason run, it looks like. The Nats are back. They don't have Bryce Harper, but they have lots of good players. So a lot of those things that they're outside their control are something that they're going to have to be at least concerned about, even though they can't control it.
Marty, I'll get back to you on the Machado and Harper. We didn't get to any of that. We haven't really talked a lot of post-Flacco, Suggs, Weddle fallout and all that. And, my God, we got the Preakness, and that's its own. I mean, you and I should just do a day on the couch, like literally, just sit around with a couple of bevies and just sit here and throw it back. I mean, we have too much to do in a 20-minute segment, but hopefully that time will come in the spring as I launch Baltimore Positive. Hopefully you'll be a visitor around for that kind of stuff, and we don't have to keep it on the field. We can really talk big picture about what's happening here. I mean, even with the Terps, and I'm wearing my UMBC hat right now, and Coppin, and how the trickle-down effect works locally, and lacrosse, and Little League baseball, and all the things that sort of, circle and make us a community. Marty Conway can be found on LinkedIn. He can be found on Twitter. He's usually lecturing very intelligent students. Hopefully none of their parents paid their way in at Georgetown, Marty, but that's for another conversation. Sure. Marty Conway can be found out there doing all the good work, and longtime executive of Major League Baseball. Make the list for the next time we get together, okay?
I will, absolutely will. Good to be with you.
You got it. Marty Conway, one of the smartest dudes I know, one of my favorite guests, and a great, great follow out on social media as well. You can find me out in the bay at Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app, becoming crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.